Hi everybody, my name is Ian, and today I'm going to show you how to use Adobe Illustrator to digitize sketch and feature maps for DPR forms. This goes along with a folder that I've created to teach you how to use Adobe Illustrator to digitize this mock site record that I made, and to teach you some of the basic skills of Illustrator. We're just going to do this little exercise. This is for students at the CRF. I don't know if I plan on putting this on private yet, but I hope it's useful for people who are more science oriented and not really used to these Adobe Illustrator programs. We're going to start by starting a new document, and what we want to do is go to a regular letter size piece of paper. Especially for what we're doing, we need the aspect ratio to fit into the DPR form. Anything else will mess with the aspect ratio in the final product, and it won't fit properly. I like using the points because it gives me more control than if we were to use inches. But to get started, let's go over some of the basic tools that we use. The first most basic one is by pressing P, it's the pen tool, and each dot adds a little point from which a line vector will appear and connect all of these. You can go ahead and connect the whole shape, and you can see that there's a little circle next to my pen tool now, which indicates that it's going to create a tool, or a circle, sorry. You can also just create a line, and then to get out of this menu, you press Control and then click off. Going back to our regular selection tool, V, we can select these, we can move them around as holes, or we can go to our direct selection tool, A, and select each one of these anchor points that we've added, and that'll change the vector. Another useful tool that we use a lot is these triangle tools. There's ellipses, there's all sorts of these. I'm just going to show you ellipse for now. You can just create an ellipse like this, and if you hold Shift, it'll create a perfect circle. This is useful also for when we're resizing things. Say we want to resize this polygon that I've made. If I click Shift and resize it, no matter where I move my cursor, it's always going to keep that same aspect ratio. If I get rid of it though, it'll kind of mess with that aspect ratio, which is oftentimes what we don't want. Another really useful tool that we use a lot is the smooth tool. It may not appear right here for you. You may have to go into this menu here, and the smooth tool should be, sorry about that, should be right here. And you can just drag and drop this to wherever you want on this toolbar, but we use it a lot, so I recommend adding it to our hotbar here. With our smooth tool, we can smooth out some of these shapes, but as you can see, that's not working. So actually, in order to do that, we need to select this path, and we can do that by holding Control and then clicking on our path here. And now we can smooth by dragging across the surface of this, and that'll smooth out the corners. Or alternatively, for these connected shapes, we can just click on any part of the path and it'll smooth the whole thing. We can also control the amount of fidelity. We can create it more smooth rather than accurate, and that'll smooth it more and more each time. We can also, once we have this selected, use this tool over here to smooth the whole shape as a unit. And in order to undo, you press Control Z. And if you want to redo rather than Control Y, we do Control Shift Z. That'll be useful for some of the things we're doing later. I recommend that you mess around with this menu and get really familiar with all of our tools before moving on to the next step. For our next step, I'm going to import our BRM map that I've made. And so full disclosure, this is a fake BRM. To avoid any issues with confidentiality and things like that, I've just kind of made this up from nothing. And so some of the proportions might be off. What we want to do is click File and then Open. And then we want to route to our mock site record folder and open this BRM sketch. As you can see, this is way larger than the original image that we have. So I'm actually going to start by scaling this down, pressing Control C, and then closing this window. I don't want to be in this window because the aspect ratio of this sheet here is off from what we really want over here. You don't have to worry about saving it for now because we won't be working out of that folder. We're just going to paste it in here. As you can see, it's still too large and it has the wrong aspect ratio. I'm going to shrink this down until it approximately fits inside of our sheet because we'll be trying to stay on our sheet for the aspect ratio issue mentioned before. To route around on your paper, you can press Control plus and Control minus to zoom in and out. To scroll up and down, and just use the scroll wheel. And then to go from side to side, you hold Control, and Control wheel or the scroll wheel will control your side to side movement. Alternatively, you can press and hold your scroll wheel, which is your middle click, and drag around on your sheet. And then if you are holding Control and you click that middle one, it'll just zoom in on your cursor. For now, we're actually going to remove this comments tab. I don't use it, and I think it just gets in the way. If you ever want it back, you can go to Window, Workspace, and reset your Essentials workspace. But I like using Essentials. Anything else, and we don't lose some of the tools that we need for what we're doing. So we're going to go into Layers and start working on our Layers tool. Here, let's go ahead and create a new layer. As you can see on this layer, nothing has changed because I haven't locked this one below, but now I can affect what's going on below this. This will be useful for what we're doing because we want to trace this without actually affecting this image, because we're going to remove it for the final product. I'm actually going to unlock it and lower the opacity on this. You can go to the Properties tab, and for a lot of our lines, we can change the fill and the stroke. The stroke is the outline, and the opacity of our items. I'm going to reduce this down to 50, and I'll show you why in a second. If we go back to our Layers tab and hit the lock button so we can't affect this anymore, I'm actually going to put this on top. This way, as we're drawing below this, we can still see what's going on, but we won't actually end up overprinting on this image. If we were to draw a large shape on top, it would cover a lot of these words and stuff, which is not exactly what we want. Let's get started by using our pen tool to trace the outside of this bedrock outcrop. As you can see, the bedrock outcrop is roughly here, and this is actually a soil layer that's been added by the people in the field. I usually start with the item on the bottom, which is really useful because then you can just add on top of it without worrying about the issue of overprinting on the image. Let's use our pen tool. And so, as you can see here, sometimes it won't allow you to write. The easy fix for this is just clicking between your layers again, and that should allow you to write again. But for this, we're going to want to add as many points on our line as possible, so that when we smooth it, it'll remain as true as possible while still looking pretty good. Sometimes it won't show this line, and so what you need to do is go into the properties and make sure that your fill is either off or turned to a color that you like. I like off, and then actually turning on our stroke, which will allow us to see that outline. I'm going to go ahead and complete this whole shape and then get back to you guys after a little cut here. But I want to remind you guys to be careful around some of these corners. Try not to go in like this on this line because it actually goes nowhere. We can add in these cracks later on the bedrock. Make sure you're adding many points on this. Don't get very lazy because then the final product won't look very good. All right, I've gone ahead and completed the shape. Hopefully yours looks something like this too. If you're having any trouble, I recommend looking up any of the issues. Again, finding your own way to do these things is really the best way of doing it. And that's how I learned. The next step here is we're going to select this before going to our smooth tool. And we're going to turn down our smooth all the way down to accurate. If you zoom in more on these, it'll actually smooth less and less. And if you zoom all the way out, it'll smooth more. So it's another way of gaining control on our smooth tool. I'm just going to hit the outside of this a couple times to smooth out some of those rougher edges. And I think that this looks pretty good in terms of looking like a bedrock outcrop. For our next step, we're going to add these rocks down here at this bottom right section. And we're going to practice some of our kind of layering that we're going to be, the basis of this project. So as we're going and putting in these rocks, I want you guys to think about, which is going to come next and how objects overlay each other in Illustrator. For example, if I were to add a rock here on this edge, it doesn't have a fill right now, so it doesn't fill in over this line. But as soon as we add our fill, which we will do eventually, it actually gets rid of that digitized line that I did. So I want you guys to think about which to do first here and come up with, how you're going to do all these rocks. My recommendation is to do this one first, and then this one, and then either this one or this one before adding this one finally. These two you can do individually, And so I'm actually going to come back again on the video when I finish this up. All right, I have gone ahead and added in these rocks here, making sure that we're preserving that original layering. It's important that we preserve the original layering because this is representative of a real thing in the field, and maybe not for this exact mock site record, but when we're digitizing these real sites, it's important that we're capturing what is happening at the site so that people can identify what's going on later. That's especially important for these rock ring features because when people are recording these in the field, they're actually making sure these are true to shape and size so that we can accurately preserve what's going on here. That way we can see if the site's been significantly disturbed. Say many of these rocks have been scattered over here, we can see that the site has had some issues with it recently, which is important for what we do in cultural resource management. For our next step here, we're gonna add some shading to this our shapes here for this bedrock. And so when we have these granary features, I've come up with this method of having two different fills so that we can easily differentiate between what is granary or manuported material and what is native bedrock. All right, sorry about that. There's some construction going on. They're building the new engineering building right next to me. So if you can hear that, sorry about that. But for our next step, we're going to add in the shading along with the plan that I've devised. And so we're going to open this other legend Adobe Illustrator file that I've left in here. And when we open it, it's going to hit us with these weird menus. Because this was made in a legacy version by someone a long time ago, it always wants to do this no matter how many times you try to replace the fonts. For some reason, it's going to do this. I just recommend hitting Don't Show on Document Open. Then we can close that, and then Don't Show me this again, and click Skip. So here we can see there's two types of granite that I was talking about, and we're actually working on a granite here. That's going to be most of what these BRMs are in. But if we are in a different material, make sure that you consult with your project lead to find a fill for the rock that is appropriate for what type of rock it is. Of course, there's always a legend so we can know what is going on, but it's always nice to have some sort of parity between different site records. So I'm actually going to grab all of these fills right here. And what I'm doing to grab all of those, you can either drag and select over all of them using your V select tool to grab all of them, or you can hold shift and select each one of these individually, and that'll allow you to grab multiple at a time. I'm going to copy these and paste them onto a new layer, which will probably be our legend layer for later on. And so by doing that, we've embedded these swatch fills onto our new document over here so that we can use them. Otherwise, they won't show up. I'm actually going to lock this and turn off the visibility so they don't get in our way. But for all of these, we're going to want to use that enlarged granite. So here I'm also using that shift selection tool, but you can also do Control A to select everything, something similar. For fill, what we want to do is use our enlarged granite right here. And so what that does is that adds a fill here. And now we can see that this is granite. This is just the one that we chose for the CRF. What we're going to do next is actually add some dimensionality to this. So as you can see on our sketch over here, there is no soil encroaching on these edges, which means that it actually has some relief from the ground. It's important that we note when a bedrock outcrop has relief, because a lot of the times these are embedded into the ground surface itself, and it has grass encroaching on the edges. For example, this portion of the bedrock outcrop has grass encroaching on the edges. So what we're going to want to do next is add that relief that we had here. Sorry, I had to pause again for the construction. And so as I was saying, the grass encroaches here, so that is showing that there is no relief on this edge, but all these other edges do have relief. The next thing we want to do before we do shading is to make sure that we have north oriented correctly. We can do this at the beginning, or we can do it now. I like to do it as we get closer to this point so that we make sure that everything's going well, and that we can read some of this lettering just in case we need to. For this case, though, it won't matter because the lettering will still be sideways. What we're going to do is open up both access to these layers and click Control A to select everything that we have access to. Up at the top, there are these little bounding boxes, and so this can change our shapes. If you hold Shift, it'll do it controlling aspect ratio. Otherwise, it'll just kind of control everything. We don't want that, though. But above our center lines here, there's little rotation points with arrows on either side. And so this allows us to rotate this. We want to make sure we orient that north arrow north. So sometimes it can be hard to get that perfect angle. And so a cheat that I've learned is by holding shift, it'll snap to 45-degree intervals. And so that helps usually with orienting it to north. If you're still having trouble orienting it to north, say it's a little bit off center, you can line up this north arrow on the edge of our template in the background and orient it so that it is perfectly north before moving it back to the center. And that's just a little way that I've learned to make sure north is perfectly north on our page. Sometimes it's okay to have north going to the left or the right too, especially if the site is really long and we want to save some space by having the long feature, using the long part of the page. So I'm going to go back to here, and now that we have north, we're going to relock this top layer, and we can actually turn off the visibility for that right now. What we want to do is select all of these and copy them before creating a new layer and putting it underneath. When we add this new layer underneath, we want to make sure that it snaps perfectly to the center of this top layer. And so I don't know if I've talked about this, but dragging and dropping objects, you have to actually hold the click button. And so you'll figure out some of these tricks as you go along. So now I actually did this wrong. I was on the same red layer, and we don't want that. So we're going to Control Z until it unpastes. And then we're actually going to drag and drop this layer on top again, use Control A, Control C, and then go to our blue layer. Locking that red layer sometimes helps. I don't know what's going on here. Sometimes it does that where it wants to, even though you've selected the new layer, it wants to continue using this top layer. That happens with the pen tool, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Sometimes you have to re-click on your layer or click off and click on again for it to work. That's just a little glitch with Adobe Illustrator. So I'm going to line this up so that it's perfectly underneath. Maybe. I don't know what's going on. I might have accidentally resized this so that it won't ever fit. Interesting. Oh, there we go. That looks like it's perfectly underneath now. And what we want to do is change the fill of this lower layer to the dark granite. This dark granite just shows some slope and adds some relief, and I think it looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is use the arrow keys on your keyboard to get a finer control of what's going on. If you hit the down arrow twice and the right arrow once, this is the method I like to use. It just adds a consistent gradient on all of our sketch maps, and I like to do that twice for these larger objects. As you can see, that adds a little bit of relief to these larger stones. What we want to do next is make sure that our lower layers are actually showing through to this top layer, because these also have relief on top of that bedrock outcrop. So what we can do is unlock this top layer, and actually let's select all of these here. And then click Control X to cut them, and then paste them onto this top layer. Here we're going to learn some more layer management tools, and so there's ways of sending things forward and backward in Illustrator, and this is just going to give you a quick on how to do that. For some of these smaller objects, we actually want to do the down twice and over to the right once because they are smaller, and it looks kind of silly when they're moved over so much as you do for the larger bedrock outcrops. Let's start by individually sending these backwards. We can do that by left or right clicking on these and then going to Arrange and Send Forward and Backwards. But as you can see, there's also some finer tuned controls here where you can click these to automatically do this. I'm going to go ahead and use these. You can find these on your keyboard and figure out how to do those for sending it forward and backward. And so the one on the left moves it backwards and the one on the right moves it forwards. Maybe. Yeah. And so what we want to do is find out where it's just below by hitting that one on the left to go backwards until it's just below, and then moving it over just one of those rotation schedules. I actually want to make sure that this one's below because they are separate. This one's at the front. This one's right there. All right, when you're done with that, setting them back and forth until they look something like this, try to keep them to the same schedule that we were doing in the same, like overlapping scheme. And that way that just solidifies that this is on top of this one, is on top of this one, et cetera, et cetera. This one's actually on top of all of those, so I need to make sure that this comes to the top. There we go. So now this one's sitting on top of the rest, so we can see that this one's actually on top. So we can go ahead and turn back on our visible top layer. And so we can see that the midden's going to cover over on this side, which actually doesn't show any relief, which is perfect. So for the next part of this, what we want to do is probably go ahead and add some of the fine features on top of this bedrock outcrop. To start, let's add these cracks in because they are the easiest. And I'm actually going to do this on the same layer as our surface bedrock layer. That way, if we need to move it, it's all just one layer. To do this, I like to start at the anchor point, starting on the outside edge and going inward. And as you know, cracks, when they stop, they don't stop abruptly like this, so we can actually add a taper on the edge of these. What we're going to do is make no fill on these and smooth them out before we do anything else. You can do that by like dragging across the whole surface here, or you can do that just by smoothing with this tool on the side, which allows you to do it a little bit more efficiently. Next, we're going to use the cut tool, which is C, and cut the end of this, which turns it into 2 line segments. After that, we want to go into our stroke profile over here on the right and go down to the profile. What we want to do is use the width profile 4, the tapered one. And so what that does is it allows it to peter off towards the end, which is what more of what cracks look like. We can go ahead and repeat this for all of the cracks on our bedrock outcrop. This one probably doesn't need to be cut because it is so short, but we want to make sure that we're sticking to the regime of smoothing them and then changing their width profiles. If you do it the other way around, sometimes it can look really funny. For this one actually forks, so I'll show you how to handle something like that. What you want to do is stick with the longer one first, and then similar to how we start and click off of this original path here, we can just click onto this anchor point here and make sure that they will overlap without having any funny sticking out lines. Let's go ahead and select both of these at once before hitting our smooth tool. And so if this happens where it only smooths one, that's pretty normal. But let's make this a little bit smoother. I like to go on the smaller end of this, like 4 to 10% usually. Anything more, and it gets too smooth. Let's go ahead and add a taper on the end of these. We have to do these individually. Sometimes when you do these, you may start at this end and go back to this way. And then when you try to add your taper profile, it'll look maybe something like this, where it's going the wrong way. The way to do that is the way I just created that problem, is by clicking this flip along axis, and that allows it to go the other way. So as you can see, that adds this taper profile to these, and I think that looks good for cracks. All right, now that we've got the cracks done, let's go ahead and add some of these superficial features, these mortars. So there's all sorts of different mortars. If you aren't familiar, the 3 main ones that we run into the field are saucer mortars, which people usually denote by just having an empty circle marked with mortar. There's also mortars with dots in the middle, which are conical mortars, which are the deeper mortars. And then there's mortars that are shaded like this, which are usually deeper basins or actually grinding flats, things like that. So we can actually look over at the legend and see what it was. So in this case, it's a milling slick. We're also going to add our granaries in a little bit. Those are a little bit more complicated. All right, we're going to go ahead and add the mortars. We're going to go to our legend, which holds all of our mortars on this side. And so we're just going to copy all the ones that we're going to be using. And actually for the milling slick, we're going to create our own, because a lot of the times they are uniquely shaped rather than circular. And I'm going to show you how to create those unique shapes as well as the shading in the middle. just copy these over for now. Let's place them onto our legend layer that we've had at the top here. We can go ahead and make that visible again and just paste them in. And then make sure we're going back to our bottom layer here. What I'm going to do actually for the surface of the things on this bedrock outcrop, I'm going to create a new layer so that we can isolate them and we don't deal with all of, accidentally selecting what's below. So we're going to lock that bedrock outcrop layer. We shouldn't be able to control any of this, but we should be able to grab our two types of milling or mortars here. And so first I'm going to copy these and then paste them on. And then we can resize them to the right size they need to be by holding shift. Make sure we're keeping the aspect ratio because these are circular features most of the time. If they aren't, they'll be pretty clearly denoted that they aren't. So you can resize them and then place them exactly where they need to go. And I'm going to do this 2 or 3 more times before speeding up the video. So there you can see we're trying to keep as much shape as possible while putting the right ones where they go. The saucer mortars go on the saucer mortars, and the conical mortars go on the conical mortars. I'll come back and show you how to do this artifact in a second, as well as this mortar. All right, I've gone ahead and added the rest of the mortars. Later we're going to add labels onto everything, and that'll be one of our final steps. For now, let's show you how to do this milling slick. We're going to trace around the edge that they've provided. And first things first, we're going to get rid of this inner fill. The next thing we're going to do is smooth this out considerably to make it very round, while still preserving the original shape. Sometimes it's hard to select. I think that looks pretty good. What we're going to do here is actually add a fill of a very light gray. And then in our legend, we'll make sure that we're noting this as a milling slick. For this artifact here, this looks like it might be a pestle or a grinding stone. So let's go ahead and outline this. And a lot of the times there's different ways of doing these. Actually, I think for this one, we're going to go with the more traditional version, rather than outlining and showing that this is an artifact in the pestle sense. We're going to go to our legend here and go to our different types of artifact. So these are kind of dated. I think we mostly just use X's for artifacts at this point because we don't collect ever, not anymore. And so we'll just be using X's. X's denote location really well, but they don't preserve those features, which can be a trade-off. X's are nice for where there's lots of features on a bedrock outcrop like this, where you want to make sure you're differentiating this as its own artifact rather than looking like some other feature. Let's go ahead and add in these granary stones in a very similar manner. What we're going to do is just start tracing out all of these stones and make sure we have the correct fill. Again, I'm probably going to do the first one with you guys before speeding up the rest. So here we're going to be, I talked about this earlier, but I want to remind you guys again to be really diligent about, how we are going about and outlining these stones, because people have done a really good job of making sure these are in the directly correct location and are the right shape. This is important for, a lot of what we do, as I said before. So what we want to do is make sure we're using the smaller, finer grained granite. It just has more dots per area. And then overall, when we zoom out, you'll be able to see that these are 2 different stone types while still looking like the same lithology. Another important thing to note on these granaries is that on, when these are overlapping, we want to do the same thing we did with the stones on the top. That was kind of practice for this, where we're going to make sure we're doing this stone first and then these 2 stones next. And you don't have to smooth after every single one that you do. You can come back and smooth later. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth these. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these all sped up, and then I'll get back to you guys in a second. Welcome back, guys. I went ahead and did the rest of those. I probably smoothed out those too much, but that's okay for the purposes of this. Just keep in mind that we really want to keep the character of what's going on here. Next, we're going to go ahead and show how to do midden, which I think is the next step. Labels will be last along with the legend, and then we're going to show you, after midden, we're going to show you how to do this drainage and some of these plants here. I'm actually going to end the video here. Or just take a quick break and then get back to you guys.